been too fast, or that has some chip in it, and we have heard all of those things. So those are some of the reasons, but generally, I think that probably Vincentians are not in a place where they feel, some of them don't feel as if there is a need to do something more, that they might be a bit comfortable where we are now, and that the thought of a vaccine, which some persons might perceive as the unknown or suspicious, they prefer to stay in their area of comfort where they are, rather than have this vaccine. But we are, as we speak, we are meeting with different groups, and the aim is to determine why there is this hesitancy so that we can address it to increase our numbers. Unmute, Teresa.
Yes, Dr. Providence, can you tell us what's happening in your neck of the woods in New Zealand? All the way in New Zealand.
Yes, hello everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm very grateful, and it's wonderful to see everyone and the faces. It's Thursday morning, just gone 11 o'clock in New Zealand. So that's the first thing. It's a little bit different in terms of time. It's also very different in terms of the response, and I think a lot of people are aware that New Zealand followed a slightly different strategy over the course of the pandemic than a lot of governments. So at the beginning, it wasn't clear to anyone how this would all turn out. And the modelers realized that if they pursued a mitigation strategy, which is what happens when you try to keep the numbers low, that the health service would really be overwhelmed quite quickly. And it was credit to the government that they listened to the scientists and they decided to follow an elimination strategy, which is sometimes, but not always possible when the country has water and is an island, so to speak. It's not always possible though. So if you're talking in terms of the pandemic strategy, that was one to try and get rid of the virus from the shores and keep it off the shores, which is an ongoing effort. And we have been more or less successful. However, with the vaccines, we are rolling out a little bit slower than Europe and the USA, understandably so, in the sense that there isn't that urgency. So even health workers have not really come up in the queue. We have a very strictly moderated queue. And that's where we are at the moment. I'm sorry, on mute.
Dr. Leacock?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the invite. Nice to see Simone after like 50 years. In Britain, we, of course, have led the rest of the world in starting to vaccinate early. I think we were out front. So at the moment, we have 24 million persons have been vaccinated in the United Kingdom. I live in Scotland, which has its slightly own self-governance, and the population in Scotland is only about 5 million. And I think we are 1/5 of the population has been vaccinated in Scotland. We didn't, in fact, start out by vaccinating frontline workers. So persons like myself were vaccinated early because we were on the front line of a burgeoning storm, if you want to call it that. And then we went to the most vulnerable people after that, so our diabetics, our hypertensives, and we started with the elderly population. We are now down to the group, and they've been strategized according to groups, the 50s to 60s. They're going to be next. I think there will be a slight slowdown because some of the vaccines are not going to be available at that time. But I think that has to do with a bit of a tussle between Europe and Britain post-Brexit.
So you have a different scenario altogether, a scarcity or shortage of vaccines?
At the moment, there's no scarcity and there's no shortage. In fact, there's a slight war early on where the rest of Europe couldn't get enough vaccines, and they were saying that Britain was preventing the vaccine from coming to them, because AstraZeneca actually is produced. This is the Oxford vaccine that people like to talk about, actually produced in Britain. And then further to that, there's a little bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it a jealous spot, where the French came out to say that they didn't want to give the over 60s vaccines, and the Germans as well, that they didn't want to give the over 60s vaccines because it wasn't as effective. And now we have a new spot coming out about the blood clots, where some of the countries have gone ahead and halted the vaccination in Europe. But in Britain, we're going ahead full steam with vaccination. Initially, what we have done in order to spread the vaccine out is that rather than give the vaccine the first and second dose within 21 days of each other, they extended that to 12 weeks, because a lot of the evidence shows that even with a single shot, that you had at least 50 to 70% reduction in you catching COVID. So that went ahead so that we could spread the vaccine, as much vaccine out as many as possible. So although we have said we have vaccinated 24 million, most of those persons have only had their first dose, because we have prolonged the period between giving the first and second dose.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about AstraZeneca. I don't know which brand of vaccine is being used in New Zealand, so maybe Dr. Providence can tell us a little bit about that. And also to zoom in on that issue where the blood clots came into play, and several European Union countries decided to put a halt on their administration of the vaccine. How important or how serious would you say that this occurrence has had, what impact it has had on the overall administration of the vaccine? And I'd like to hear from all three of you where this is concerned.
Thank you, Theresa. New Zealand has made a pact with all of the major companies so that we are going to be eligible for almost all of the leading vaccines out there. And right now they're rolling out the mRNA spike vaccine. So that's the Moderna and the Pfizer. But they have not said anything about the AstraZeneca that is disparaging or asking, whether it's efficacious. So I can actually talk a little bit, even though I think it is more up to ALWYN to speak about the AstraZeneca, but I'd just like to reiterate that this concern does not seem to have a medical grounding in terms of the clots, the clots in the AstraZeneca vaccine. Just looking at the evidence out there, what we can see is that there's something like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 30-something incidences of clots, which are known as deep vein thrombosis medically, which is basically clots in the lower limbs and in the deep veins, and also clots in the lungs that can sometimes lead to a problem. About 30 episodes of that have occurred over the administration of about 7 million vaccines. And that is really an incredibly small number. Now, that is not to say that there is a link between the two. If there was a link between the two, then that even might generate some cause for concern. But there's no link been found, and there's no increase in the number of these DVTs over persons who are not getting vaccinated. So it seems to be a little bit of a red herring that is being pulled there. And that's what I would have to say about that in general from a medical perspective. Over to you.
ALWYN?
Well, the field that I practice is in obstetrics. And every time I see a woman who comes to the ward and is in labor and need a cesarean section, I have to counsel about blood clots. And I have to say to her, your risk of a blood clot is, the general population is 1 in 60,000, basically. And if you have a cesarean, that goes by a further 4 times. So it boils down to about a 1 in 10,000 risk. So far in Britain, over the 24 million people who have had being vaccinated, there are about 24 people who have had blood clots, which is far less than your average background of having a clot of 1 in 60,000, right? And so today the argument was with the European Medicines Association, which is the Europeans. They actually came forward and said to the government, we don't have any solid evidence to say that there are clots related to the vaccine, and your suspension should be lifted and you should be going ahead and vaccinating people, because the risk of people having this disease far outweighs the benefits from giving the vaccine, and you need to crack on with it. And so I think later this afternoon, I think the French will lift in the restriction on going ahead and started to dish out AstraZeneca vaccine. The Germans are still a little bit hesitant about it, but even within Germany, because they have different municipalities, there's a little bit of politics in it, because some of the regions are going ahead with the vaccines, and there's been a backlash in one of the municipalities where the CDU people have lost actually control of the government for holding back on giving the AstraZeneca vaccine. So there's a bit of European politics at play as well in the whole issue.
All right, in St. Vincent, so we are using the AstraZeneca, and the last week, because it was last week, Thursday, most of the noise about the AstraZeneca and some European countries, at that time, I think it was just Norway and Denmark, where they had paused because of these persons with clots showing up. And we actually had on Thursday 2 sessions, one in the morning, one in the evening, with teachers. And it came up by the Thursday afternoon, it was brought up as an issue. Actually, the presenter, the facilitator, actually came forward with it first, but it definitely was an issue in terms of questions came up, and that continued into Friday, because we had sessions then too. By Friday morning, we were getting calls from persons saying that they had intended to have the vaccine, but then because of this, they would wait or they would not bother at this point. We had one teacher who had actually had the vaccine already, but then has a history of clots, and that person was extremely concerned. And so we definitely have that, the concern was there, oh, this thing has clots, so we told you this is what was going to happen. And it definitely had an impact in terms of, as I said, the ground level hesitancy that's there. And then on top of that, this was the AstraZeneca being, the story being. So it had some impact on the rollout, without a doubt.
And going forward, even though Italy, for instance, has in fact now said that they are going to go ahead with their administration, do you see that hampering our efforts here at all? I
think because, as we know, persons have heard it, so it was almost like a reinforcement. You see, I told you so, something was really wrong. And so now, even though we put out a release early on, we dealt with it up front, we reassured persons, and now we would definitely let them know that this is what has been decided on. As we suspected, this is the science, and in terms of causation, there's no relationship. I would not say that our battle is going to be easier because there's now been the retraction. But it is something we're aware of, and so we will try to deal with it. But there is that, initially it was the 65s, over 65s, then now this. And so we actually have persons saying, okay, well, we want to wait for another vaccine instead, because I'm not too sure about this one. But we'll continue to move forward and try to present the evidence. But besides the evidence, because there are a lot of persons who would actually say to you, listen, I understand the science, I understand what you're saying, but I just still can't bring myself, and healthcare workers have said this to me too, I can't bring myself to go to get it. So, so we're not what is the push? And what Carolyn said about the urgency that is a bit sluggish there, I really do think St. Vincent, we have 9 deaths. St. Lucia next door to us, I think they're up to about 55 now. And I think that is a definite reason for this sluggishness, because some persons do not see COVID, the risk of catching the virus and having an episode of COVID. They do not put that with a serious risk of death or a serious risk of major illness. And that is what we have been trying to let persons know, that even though it might be an asymptomatic thing, or it might be, you might get it, the majority of people recover, that we are now seeing the long-term effects. So we're trying to move towards where the risk of not being vaccinated is a lot greater to you than any sort of perceived bad outcomes in having the vaccine.
Okay, you mentioned that some people are in fact saying that they're going to wait on another vaccine. What are the possibilities that there will be another vaccine to be administered here in St. Vincent?
Well, Alwyn was talking, and Carolyn was talking about, we talk about vaccine nationalism and all of the bigger countries, the proportion of vaccines bought up by a few big countries compared with what the other countries are getting. So there is a real battle, a real challenge out there in terms of getting vaccines. We are part of the COVAX facility, and just today we received notification that we should get the first part of the COVAX vaccines, again AstraZeneca, around the 3rd of April. In terms of getting other vaccines, so we had a small amount of the Sputnik vaccine, and that's what I had. I have now completed my course, so I'm fully vaccinated. We should get some more of that, but even that has been a struggle. We have indicated our interest to the United States because they offered vaccines from their stockpile, and we have indicated our interest that yes, we would be, interested in getting what you might offer, but that's just a possibility. That is something done when they have probably finished with what finish, So the possibility of getting anything else besides the AstraZeneca or even the Sputnik, I would say at this point is quite low. But even so, the AstraZeneca is showing itself to be an extremely effective vaccine. So the need to wait for something else should not be there. It's not as if we have a vaccine that is substandard or that is not doing what it's supposed to do. It is. The numbers, as Alwyn would say, how many, the admissions to hospital, the deaths in England, in the UK, in the US, those are going down. We are seeing the evidence. So the US, it would be the Moderna and the Pfizer. But in the UK, there is evidence that it works. So even though somebody might say you want to wait for something else, what is the reason for waiting for something else? Is it that you think there's something better out there? We have proof that this vaccine is excellent. It is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And the likelihood of dying from COVID is much greater, or the likelihood of having a major poor outcome from contracting COVID is much greater than anything that might happen to you if you have the AstraZeneca vaccine.
And we'll talk some more about that when we come back from our first break in just a moment.
On Friday, March 19th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $180,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, You have to be in it to win it.
Next Lotto jackpot, $180,000.
Hello and hi.
Hello everyone, I am Shakel Bob. I am a former Miss Pitani, a former Miss Rural SVG and Miss LCG contestant and runner-up. I'm a lawyer by profession but a pageant lover at heart. Do not let the negatives prey on your mind because a stitch in time saves 9. So, it's COVID vaccination time. Get vaccinated today to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, March 19th is $200,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
Hey! More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, SVG reports 375 COVID-19 recoveries as COVID-19 cases decrease. Internal assessment of the outbreak of COVID-19 at the Mental Health Rehabilitation Center has been carried out. And this country's Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Egan Saves, urges church leaders to lead by example. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.
Welcome back. Want to talk a little bit more about the point Dr. KEIZER-BEACHE was making when we took the break, but there are a couple of questions, or there is a question. Someone wants to know what's the need to vaccinate the entire nation when people recover naturally without medical intervention. So, Dr. KEIZER, and I'd like to hear the take from the other panelists on this as well.
Okay, so because as we were just saying, the recovery, we're learning more about long COVID. And even though persons recover naturally, we're seeing more and more that that natural recovery is not 100%, that there are some persons who are going to have long-term effects, and that can impact their lungs, they have brain fog. There are some persons who they're now saying about persons having decreased fertility. So there are those things. You can have those long-term effects, those who recover. You can have those who do not recover, or who remain extremely ill for a while. So the fact of recoveries, we did 375 recoveries last night, but the aim is not to get sick in the first place, not to contract it in the first place. And that's why what we need to do. We need to be able to, when somebody is COVID positive, even if they're not sick, they're out of circulation for 2 weeks. If that person is the breadwinner in a household with 4 children and that person cannot work, what happens to that household? What happens to those children? So, we need to really consider the implications. It's not just the physical illness, it's also the livelihood, how it affects persons. We need to understand that we need not to get infected in the first place because of the constraints and how it affects the entire society. When you had how many persons being ill at the same time, being away from work, you might have an entire workplace being shut down. If you have a little office where you have 2 persons of your 10 staff showing up positive, The other 8 have to go home and quarantine for a long period of time. That's your entire business shut down. So we don't want to get infected in the first place, and that's why we need to be vaccinated to prevent the infections.
Dr. Leacock, you care to respond to that query?
Well, I would like to say that a stitch in time saves 9. There are a few things I think people are taking for granted. One is, as viral illnesses go, when you start showing symptoms of the COVID, you had already given it to several of your friends and your family, and they may not recover from something that you've given them. You're in effect going to, like they say in Britain, don't murder your granny, because you're wrong your grandparents, and they're the ones who are vulnerable, or the diabetics in the home, and you're going to give it to them, and you're just showing symptoms. There is no guarantee that if you have COVID, that you will recover. So to say, well, you're going to recover anyway is not something wise to think, because even if you recover, like Simone says, the morbidity is devastating. I have just seen colleagues who have had, their husband has had it once, thought he'd recovered from it, and is back in hospital a second time, and now could hardly walk, can't get out of bed because he's almost moribund. In bed, can't do anything for himself. There are people last year when they had the Cheltenham Festival, they disobeyed the rules and went along with this big horse festival, who went along, got COVID, lost fingers, lost toes, can't walk from the bathroom to the bedroom. So to say, well, you're going to recover, you don't have a guarantee that you'll recover, and you'll recover 100%. In other words, you don't know what the morbidity would be, and you do not know how long that will be around. And you can get it a second time. You can get it a second time. So if you were to be vaccinated, your risk of getting that is so low. It's so low. It's reduced to almost minimal. I think with a double dose of the vaccine, you're up to 95% chance that you will not get this disease. And if you compare that, if you are not vaccinated, that you have a good 30 to 50% likelihood that you will get the disease, and the case fatality rate, that is the death rate from COVID-19, is quite high. And we must take that into consideration. You're not doing anyone a favor by saying that you're not taking the vaccine, right? And you're probably doing more harm to yourselves and to your relatives and the people around you if you don't take the vaccine.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Leacock. Dr. Providence, what are you doing in New Zealand to increase vaccine uptake?
Yeah, the extent to which the government and different non-governmental organizations are going to make sure that we reach deep into the different communities is good to see. I would like to just back up what Simone and ALWYN were saying just before going into New Zealand, because I'm not sure how much that is relevant to the Vincentian population. I just want to back it up by also saying that some people listen to the arguments that they are in a lower risk group, and they confuse that with individual data and population data. So when you talk about a high and a low risk group, you're talking about population data. And there's no guarantee, as ALWYN was saying, that if you are in a high risk group, that you are going to necessarily get it, and no guarantee if you're in a low risk group that you're going to stay well. So the numbers of people in low risk groups who do badly are smaller, but you really don't want to take that risk. And that is, again, something that you have to keep emphasizing. And because vaccination is such an emotional subject, it triggers a lot of emotions in people, which is quite understandable, but it's our job to keep on educating and keep things transparent and open. So coming back to New Zealand, it is a very multicultural and ethnically diverse country, although the vast majority are of European descent. But where the vaccine skepticism lies and where there's greater hesitancy is in the ethnic communities. And it's a double blow, because these people in ethnic communities which are very varied. We have refugee groups from Sudan, Afghanistan, etc. We have the Caribbean diaspora. We have a couple of thousand there. We have a large number from the African continent itself, and we have a huge Pacific and Maori population. And it's a double blow in the sense that a lot of the underlying issues that make the population susceptible to COVID in the first place, to getting a worse outcome, are lying within those communities. So they have inequalities that are widened. So one of the things that has been done is to use the providers of the outreach program to make sure that those people come from the communities themselves. And they're translated into several, maybe about 20 different languages. And they also make sure that you see the people, the representatives of those communities getting the vaccine. It is one thing to hear about it, but never underestimate the power of a very good visual. Once you see the respected community leaders getting the vaccination, that goes a huge way in breaking down a lot of misinformation and a lot of concern and fear.
Okay, thank you for that. It's important because we are all in this together, and any success stories would certainly be done to the benefit of all of us. There seems to be a problem where healthcare workers in particular are concerned in our part of the world. I would like to know what's the uptake healthcare workers in Scotland, and what is being done to increase that uptake, because Scotland, the UK, do not seem to have had a problem where healthcare workers are concerned. Why is there that hesitancy among our healthcare workers?
Well, like I don't know why it is that hesitancy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but for instance, in my institution, the uptake has been vast. We are probably over 90% vaccinated. And in fact, when the decision was made to delay giving the second shot from 3 weeks to 12 weeks, that caused an uproar among the health carers, because we were in the front line. We were seeing people coming in and dropping dead. Yeah, we were seeing colleagues who can't come to work, and so we've had to double up and triple up. We've had to postpone all of the non-urgent operations to make rooms for COVID patients. You know, the theaters have had to be turned into intensive care units in order to facilitate this. So we have seen it on the front line, and we realized that the only way to tackle this is to use PPE, so wash your hands, wear face masks, use gloves, and the second thing was to get a vaccine to come along, and it couldn't come along too soon for us in our situation. And one of the other problems we had with that is that the teachers then said, well, you know, we're an essential service too. Why are you giving health workers preference over us? And the police also came along after and said, but, you know, we're the ones who are out in the street who have to go to people's home and knock on their doors, etc. We should be vaccinated too. So I think this is the public who are coming forward and saying, we need this protection. And the other thing is, a lot of us, we have COVID fatigue. I don't, you know, you go home and you come back and you're locked in the house. You can't go out, you can't go to a pub and sit down, you can't go to a movie, etc. Persons would like to get back to a normal life. And I think maybe that's what's happening in St. Vincent. You've never really shut down, you've never really curtailed a lot of activities until recent time. And people have this idea that we could still sort of, ride out the storm, so to speak. Yeah, so we did that. I think that's where the complacency is coming in. But we are well ahead of our targets in the NHS. Teachers have now been prioritized, and then police have now been prioritized. One of the things that's happening is that vaccine wastage is becoming a problem as well. And so the idea is that if you have these institutional people, is that you can vaccinate them by calling them in at the last minute so that we don't have to throw away extra vials of the vaccine.
Thank you very much, and we'll be right back after our final break.
On Friday, March 19th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $180,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $180,000.
Erasmus Wiley Glasgow, and I'm feeling perfectly fine. I just had the vaccine and I'm trying to encourage each and everyone to come and get the vaccine. It's important. Life goes on, but with this vaccine, it makes it even easier. Because of the field we are in, we are actually at the front. So each taxi driver should come and take this vaccine because trust me, it will be important to each and every one of us going forward.
Do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, March 19th is $200,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
Hello and hi.
Hello everyone, I am Shakel Bob. I am a former Miss Pitani, a former Miss Rural SVG and Miss SVG contestant and runner-up. I'm a lawyer by profession but a pageant lover at heart. Do not let the negatives prey on your mind because a stitch in time saves 9. So, it's COVID vaccination time. Get vaccinated today to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, SVG reports 375 COVID-19 recoveries as COVID-19 cases decrease. Internal assessment of the outbreak of COVID-19 at the Mental Health Rehabilitation Center has been carried out. And this country's Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Egan Saves, urges church leaders to lead by example. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.
Welcome back, and Dr. Beach, I'm coming straight to you. There's a question. Is it factual that persons here in SVG who took the COVID-19 vaccine are getting renal failure? If yes, will that be life-threatening?
That's not so at all. The process in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, just as it is throughout the world, is that at least under those countries that follow the WHO EPI extended program for immunization structure, is that you have strict reporting of what you do. So every case, and as I said earlier, remember when I gave the figures and I said we have 8,911 on the books, but we know of another amount which will put us at 9,200. That is because each individual case, name, age, date of birth, ID card, all of that, that's registered, lot number in terms of which lot the vial came, they took the vaccine from. Everything is recorded. And not just what vaccine you got, who got it, but if there are any complaints or any problems after. So if somebody has a rash after and that is reported, that is documented. Obviously, if somebody is admitted to hospital, somebody has renal failure, that person is going to be admitted to hospital and you're going to have some investigations as to what is the cause of this renal failure. And there are no reports of anything like that. So definitely no, I can say, straight up, there's no report of anyone having had the vaccine and then following up with renal failure. What I really want to push in here though, because there's a video that's been circulated throughout St. Vincent, the CMO's group, they complain that persons in Jamaica, throughout the region, have been seeing this clip where somebody is pulling up the vaccine site for the adverse reactions, and they're listing out the hundreds of persons who have died after the vaccine. And they are suggesting, they're saying that these persons died from the vaccine. That is not true. If you kill yourself after you had the vaccine, your name will go there. If you get knocked over by a vehicle after you've had the vaccine, your name will go there. So it is not a causation, it is not that you died from, but you died in a time period after having the vaccine. And there's no evidence that any of those persons on that list and anybody, there's been no evidence of causation of saying the vaccine caused that. That hasn't happened in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we are looking for everything, and that hasn't happened anywhere else that I'm aware of. Okay?
Okay, somebody says they've had their vaccine, they have completed their course in the United States, they are due to go on vacation sometime soon, and is it safe for them to visit St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
Well, they should be safe. As it is now, we have our protocols. We still have our protocols, which if you're completely vaccinated and you've had it, you've finished your last dose, if it's a 2-dose or if it's a 1-dose like the J&J, you come in, and instead of, if you're coming from a high-risk country, you will come in, and instead of doing 14 days quarantine, you will do 7 days quarantine. You will have to have your PCR testing done, because you recognize that there is still the risk of carrying the virus, even though you do not become ill with it, and so therefore passing it on to somebody else. So it will be safe to come to St. Vincent, and as we go on and as we build our numbers, it will be safer. But the same protocols would be in place to minimize your putting us at danger by bringing in some new strain or bringing in some, version of the coronavirus.
Okay, so one of my concerns is the fact that if we don't improve on our uptake, there's a real possibility of vaccines expiring. What are the implications of that, Doctor?
Okay, so this morning I was on an AMC meeting. That's the COVAX facility for those countries which are getting the vaccine through the COVAX facility free. And what they pointed out was that all of the vaccines currently have a shelf life of between 3 to 5 months. So any country who gets a vaccine right now, if you get a vaccine, like in February, the expiry date is going to be around May. If you get it in March, it is most likely going to be around June. So there's been a lot of talk about this expiry date and, oh, we are rushing because we need to get the vaccine out before it expires and so on. Listen, we have already determined at what point we would then say we have used X amount of vaccine and we are not going to be able to use this amount within the period, and that amount will be given to our neighbors. St. Lucia is doing 2,000 vaccines per day. Okay, we have our neighbors, we share, we will give the vaccine, and we know we will get more vaccine, because some persons are saying, oh, if we give it, and if we don't use it, we won't be able to get any more. That's not so. Okay, so we will share, we will give what we don't use, and we will get more vaccine and vaccinate those persons who come forward, and hopefully we won't have to give away any vaccine, because persons would come to the realization that they should be vaccinated to protect themselves, protect their children, protect their loved ones, protect their livelihoods. And that is what we need Vincentians to understand, that as it is now, we can't give anybody under 18. So that means all of our children there under 18, they are vulnerable, they are exposed. We need to protect them. And the way we protect them, besides making sure we wear a mask, sanitizing, socially distancing, one extremely effective way of doing that Even if you fall asleep without your mask, if you are vaccinated, you're not going to give that child sleeping on the bed with you. So all those pediatricians out there telling me child, children don't sleep on the bed, but you're not going to give that child that virus. Okay, so that's what we really need Vincentians to focus on, rather on this expiry date, and that is the reason for the great push. That is not the reason. The Ministry of Health, Wellness and the Environment is determined to make us as safe and as healthy as possible, and by taking the vaccine, we are convinced this is the way we will get there.
Well, you sort of preempted me, because I was going to ask all of you guys to impress upon the minds of Vincentians why they should seriously consider taking the AstraZeneca. So Dr. LEACOCK, I'll ask you to tell us in a nutshell.
Well, if I could use myself as an example, I don't see how I would want to subject myself to a disease that would put me in a hospital where I have this severe inflammatory response where my lungs are actually filling up with material so that I can't breathe. Yes? And that the end result may be that I have to go on a ventilator and may never come off the ventilators. It's one thing to go on the ventilator, it's the other thing is to get you off of a ventilator when you're on. It's never easy. And some people, you take them off and you have to put them back on and they end up dying because they've been ventilated. So I don't see how people could say, okay, let me brave that sort of situation. If you're thinking about blood clots, that's exactly what the disease does. It causes you to have blood clots, and you clot faster and quicker and more severely than if quote unquote it was from the vaccine. So why do I want to subject myself to that? And then we have all of these silly myths that it's there to kill out black people, so I don't want a vaccine. I can't take the vaccine. It's there to kill out black people. Well, hello. If you want to take a disease and kill out yourself, the white people will be happy for you to do that. If you want to bring it in that term and frame of mind. So I think that's really silliness. If you're diabetic, you are at risk. You should be in the front of the line to have the vaccine. If you have asthma and you're obese and you have hypertension, you should be in the front line because you are at risk. And you're saying to me, in other words, if you know that you don't use the crossing, a car will come down and knock you down, right? But it's better for you to cross the road and not use the crossing. Then that just makes no sense, This is here to prevent us. And one of the things is that we've become so liberal and so modern. We have so many rights now that we think, well, okay, fine. Yes, it's your entirely right to not to choose. But I've seen in the days when I was going to school, friends of mine die from polio and friends die from typhoid before we could have had a vaccine. So I am saying to people, I am not going to say to you, don't take the vaccine. I tell you, yes, take the vaccine. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. And choices have consequences. And I teach medical students, and I always say to them, when you make decisions in life, be prepared to live with the consequences. The consequences of you not taking the vaccine, one of it is death. Put death at the top. All the other things that you think you might survive and come after that. And those are also severe consequences.
Dr. Providence, I think you have the last word this evening.
Okay, thanks very much. I would like to just say that this vaccine is safe. There has never been a time in history when everybody in the world was concentrated on getting one thing done. And as a result of that, the vaccines that have come out have been the cream of the crop. They have been subjected to extreme scrutiny. What Simone was saying earlier is that every side effect, every adverse effect has been put under the microscope, and we have been able to look at it on a worldwide basis. People wonder, how can a vaccine that has been developed in under, a year actually be good? That's because everybody has been concentrated on getting this vaccine out there. And as a result, we have the science that will help us to overcome this terrible disease. I can only add to my voice to the others in saying that the vaccine is safe. COVID is a killer. Take the vaccine.
Thank you so very much, Drs. CAROLYN Providence, ALWYN LEACOCK, and Simone KEIZER-BEACHE. Doctors on the front line, all Vincentian doctors, albeit in different jurisdictions, different time zones throughout the world. It's been a pleasure having all three of you on this evening's program. see you again sometime, and thank you so much for your continuing efforts. My schoolmate, ALWYN. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
And my schoolmate, CAROLYN. So, lots of school.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you.
From 3 years old on.
That's it for this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back again next week, Wednesday, at the same time. Good evening.
Bye, ALWYN. Bye, CAROLYN.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Be safe.
Thanks.
Be
Bye-bye.
safe too.
On Friday, March 19th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $180,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $180,000.
Erasmus Wiley Glasgow, and I'm feeling perfectly fine. I just had the vaccine, and I'm trying to encourage each and everyone to come and get the vaccine. It's important. Life goes on, but with this vaccine, it makes it even easier. Because of the field we are in, we are actually at the front. So each taxi driver should come and take this vaccine, because trust me, it will be important to each and every one of us going forward.
Do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, March 19th is $200,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6, a bigger jackpot game.
Hello and hi.
Hello everyone, I am Shakel Bob. I am a former Miss Pitani, a former Miss Rural SVG and Miss LCD contestant and runner-up. I'm a lawyer by profession, but a pageant lover at heart. Do not let the negatives prey on your mind, because a stitch in time saves 9. So, it's COVID vaccination time. Get vaccinated today to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, SBG reports 375 COVID-19 recoveries as COVID-19 cases decrease. Internal assessment of the outbreak of COVID-19 at the Mental Health Rehabilitation Center has been carried out. And this country's Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Ralph Egan Salves, urges church leaders to lead by example. Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Updates.